Hi everybody, John Arns from Rubicon Trail Foundation here. We're here at Edio Winery today. It's a beautiful location. And we're here to start a new series called Rubicon Pioneers. So today, we're here with one of the Rubicon Pioneers, or really two of them. We're here with Mike and Sheri Arnold. So Mike and Sheri are longtime trail users, but we couldn't get them on the trail, but we tempted them with a glass of wine, so here we are. So I'm going to start with you, Mike. Where did you grow up? How'd you end up here?
I was born and raised in Placerville, California, 1941, and my mother was born and raised here, as well as her mother. In fact, they grew up in this country.
In Camino.
They were Native Americans.
Oh, and grew up that way in this country.
Yeah.
I knew that, but I'd forgotten.
Yeah. And that's about it. Went to high school here. Went to 1 year of college, and it didn't suit me.
So
I wanted to play baseball.
So you went to high school in the late 50s, right? So you must have been in El Dorado, because that was the only high school.
It was the only game in town.
Yeah. And how about you, Sheri?
Pretty much the same. I was born and raised here in Placerville. My family has been here for a long time. My grandfather grew up in Garden Valley, and so he became a ranger on the Pacific National Forest. And so I spent a lot of time at Pacific House at the ranger station and going into the mountains with him.
So that would have also been in the 50s.
50s, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to ask
El
you.
Dorado National Forest. You're right.
Yeah, you said Pacific, but that's
well,
okay.
you said Edio Winery, so
it is at
Stelfino.
No, Stelfino Farms is Edio Winery.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
We're going to cut that out. Yeah.
No!
I would have had that completely wrong.
No, so it's Delfino Farms,
Yeah.
Jones Bakery, which is
Right.
the kids' mall,
Right. Yeah.
or the winery kids'
Yeah.
grandmother,
Right.
and Edio Winery.
Cammy worked at Kids Inc. when she was in high school.
Okay, and you know they changed the name from Kids Inc. when they opened the winery because they thought it was inappropriate.
Yeah.
Wildly inappropriate to call a winery
I
Kids
didn't
Inc.
know
would
that,
be,
but that
yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. When the kids are doing a great job with it.
Yeah.
They are.
Oh, yeah. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Okay, back to Rubicon. So you both grew up in Placerville. How did you end up doing stuff off road in the Rubicon?
Probably refer to Sheri there.
Okay, let's hear it.
Our first trip.
Yeah. We used to do name tags in Georgetown for Jeepers Jamboree, and we'd go over there and we'd do name tags, and people would get goofy things, to wear.
This was part of your business.
It was part of the business. And then a weird thing happened. There was a recall for somebody, a supervisor. And Mark Smith, I was working in the attorney's office, and Mark Smith came in and said, "Sheri, you're in the right district. Would you hold this petition?" I said, "Sure." So the next week, the paper came out, and it only came out once a week, so everybody read it. And it said that Sheri Arnold was the head of the recall committee. So I was talking to an attorney, and I said, "What am I going to do? They raised Mike's rent. The lady won't even let me deliver the check, over here because of what I'm doing." And he says, "Tell him you have to be paid. Just tell him you're the paid secretary." So Mark came in, and I said, "You need to pay me because of this." And he says, "Okay, how about a trip on the Jamboree?"
That was his payment.
That was his payment, and we took it. That was the first time that we went on the Jamboree.
And what year was that?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask that.
It was in the late 60s,
Yeah.
I'm thinking. Mid to late 60s.
It was, I think the next year was some again, or it was the 76. No, I don't know.
It was one that they had
Special Jeep.
received Jeeps from corporate that had red, white, and blue. Everyone was different. The Jeeps were all red or white, and they all had this flag art. It was a decal, I'm sure, but it was stars and stripes going from the hood down around the cowling and the back, and they all had something different, but it had to do with the 100-year
something.
1776.
Oh, so it was probably
But that was
1976.
Yeah, that was
See,
later.
that was much later, but
Because we took,
that's what, we took a nice Jeep on that. The first Jeep we took was my uncle's 1950 civilian. Kevin has it now, that little flat thing. And my sister and her boyfriend and Sheri and I, no back seat. Went to Wentworth Springs at that time, was the trail.
So 3 of you in the Jeep, but no back seat. 4 of you in the Jeep, no back seat.
No back seat.
no tent.
And that was our first free trip. We went, never been here
Like,
before.
thanks, Mark.
And we loved it. We slept out under the stars. We had a tarp under us. And we said, heck, this is terrific.
And, because we had done business with Mark forever, but my dad was a commander of the Legion the first year that he became the cook crew. So,
Good.
lots of roots.
You talked about making name tags, and that had to do with your business. And your business is
Arnold's for awards.
Arnold's for Awards. And how long have you been in business down there?
Since 1970.
Since 1970.
53 years.
53 years.
Yeah.
So 54.
Sorry.
That's all right. So anybody who's local has used Arnold's for Awards. Anybody who's been involved in Rubicon Trail Foundation has used them over and over again.
We had our meetings in there.
We used to have our meetings
upstairs
at Arnold's
we
for
did,
Awards
yes,
for
that's right.
about 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And we the cups that you get on Jamboree are you guys, and I mean just over and over again.
The wine tasting classes.
Wine tasting glasses come from Arnold's. Anyway, your business has made a mark on Jamboree and on Jeeping in general and on the Rubicon.
Nice.
Yeah, I think so.
Good. That feels good. We try to give a lot back to the community.
That's always been my experience.
It's been very tough at times, but we still try to do something.
So you became involved in Jeepers Jamboree by accident. Someone traded you you bartered for the trip and didn't know what you were getting. So the following year, did you come in as crew, or how did that start?
No, we just came in again, and then I bought a Jeep, I think the third year.
Right.
Oh boy, it started from there. We loved it. The kids grew up in that Jeep. They were
Learned to
driving
drive
off.
in that Jeep.
Yeah, and they were driving when they were teenagers in that Jeep. They learned to drive on the Rubicon.
Yeah. So Kevin told me at least one occasion that he would ditch high school in the afternoon and go straight from there to the Rubicon, spend the whole weekend, drag himself in on Sunday, and just barely get to school that Monday morning. And he did it. He said he did it often.
The other thing he would do is take buddies with him. And so I would start getting phone calls from buddies' mothers saying, when are they going to be back? I said, well, there's no problem. They should be here this time, but you never know.
It's the Rubicon. You
But
don't
don't
know.
worry,
Yeah.
Worst case is they'll camp till Monday.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So you, without revealing too much now, you rock rolled for Jeepers Jamboree. How long did you do that?
Oh my gosh, long time. I don't know how many years. It was before the 25th.
Okay.
And oh my goodness. And Mark brought on a bunch of people for the 25th. I remember that.
So the 25th was 1977.
Okay, correct. Should be about right.
Yeah.
So I know on a trail at least 3 or 4 years before that.
Yeah.
And it was a joy to work for it. I enjoyed Mark. And actually his son was my trail boss.
Right.
Greg. And Greg, I'm pretty sure is the one that named Arnold Rock. We'll get into that later if you want.
No, that's fine. So Greg named Arnold's Rock. And
I'm pretty sure he did because my brother and I, our area was from Buck Island. The first year I was a trail guide was Mark sent us to Spider Lake to stay there. Well, he did it for a reason. He knew there were nudists at Spider Lake in our trail crew. And they all went there, and unbeknownst to us, I'm not a nudist, and I dove in the water the moment our shift was over. The last Jeep went by.
Always did, yeah.
And Noby stayed there, and his wife, Bob Amber and his wife, the deputy sheriff, Harvey Linville,
yeah.
and his wife Judy. That was about it, I believe.
Well, from that list, I already know who the nudist was.
Who they were, yeah.
Yeah.
And so Mark thought it was pretty damn funny. And he enjoyed stuff like that.
Playing little tricks on people.
Oh, yeah, he did.
He did.
And he was standoffish, you never knew, but I knew. And then he sent us 2 years later to Buck Island, and we stayed there. And our trail responsibility, my brother and I, between there and Walker's Rock, was we'd travel up and keep the Jeep. No radio contact in those days.
Right.
It was by foot,
Right.
So we were up and down that hill, I don't know how many times. And that's how we really come to find the Indian Trail.
So we'll talk about the Indian Trail in a
later,
minute.
yeah.
I want to hear about that. But and that makes sense that you would find it that way because
Yeah.
it's so much faster and easier to
Oh
walk.
gosh, yeah.
So did it come about that you ended up just at Arnold's Rock? Or were you always the whole area?
We were pretty much the whole area, but they knew where to find us. And it was always there. It was kind of a middle ground.
Sure.
And Greg would always say, you just go to Arnold Rock. And I think one year we got it on a printout, at our annual dinner.
So it just kept getting called that more and more
Yeah.
until it became a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you talked a little bit about your brother, but you keep calling him your brother. Kenny was a big part of your life back then.
Big time, yeah.
Tell us about Kenny and your relationship with him and the kind of stuff he did with you, if you don't mind.
No, don't mind at all. Proud of him. He was, hope I don't get too weepy here.
Yeah.
I'm awful. He's a good guy. He's a ladies' man. And kind of hard to control there, but
I've heard that from
very,
people.
very clever mind he had, fixing stuff and building stuff. He had no problem tearing something apart and putting it back together. I think that came from my dad, probably. My dad was an Okie, and if they didn't have it, they built it, like your dad. They built it. And Kenny was a great mechanic. We learned in the old days, big V8s went through here with Hollies. Well, we became tremendous Holly mechanics. We had a crescent wrench, a little tiny crescent wrench, about that big. My dad always packed one in his pocket, and a screwdriver.
And that was
we could adjust the float, because V8s didn't work well in that high altitude and hot.
Yeah, that's fuel injection.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's so nice now. But yeah, those guys called us heroes. My brother, he says, Mike, he says, we could patent this. But anyway, we'd fix a carburetor and bang, away they'd go. It was, in those days, we had to get under the Jeep and work on them sometimes, fix stuff, help them hold stuff, put it back together.
And there were no trail mechanics back then.
No, not to speak of.
Right, they had mechanics.
And naturally, if there was one, he wasn't anywhere near you.
No. And you had no way to talk to him.
No radio communication at all. Yeah, everybody had a CB. Yeah, a CB. If you could see him, you could talk to him.
Yeah.
You yelled to him as loud as you could on a CB.
Let's talk about Gene Chappie for a second. Now, Gene Chappie was a supervisor of El Dorado County and
Yeah.
eventually became a U.S. Senator.
Correct.
And he was instrumental in legislation that created the California State Parks Off-Highway Motor Vehicle Recreation Division, and the grant program that now keeps Rubicon open. But you knew him from a different perspective. He was your fellow rock roller, correct?
Well, he was. He was actually one of my bosses. He was well, they call them committee people in those days.
Mm-hmm.
He was a director.
So he owned a piece of Jeepers Jamboree.
Yes. Mark was pretty clever picking his directors also. We can talk about that later if you want. But
Sure.
Jim Chappie, he had a part in that trail, and it was Chappie Rock. And
Now, where was Chappie Rock? I know where it is, but I want you to tell me.
Chappie's Rock. I think it was between Arnold's Rock and the old Big Sluice.
Yeah.
The best way to the top of the slab. Pretty good drop off on the other side. And he had a fella up there sitting in a chair, and I don't remember his name. And he was the friend I was trying to tell you about of Chuck Walker's.
Okay.
And he'd just sit in that chair and he'd tell you, you're okay, because you can't see on the other side of that rock.
No, it just drops
At
off.
all, it drops off. And we used to go both ways up and down that trail in a Jeep too. And it was harder coming back up. But
So for reference to people that run the trail today, right now, the legal variants of the trail are what we know now as the Indian Trail, which goes down the slab, and the other is Old Sluice. In those days, you would to get on the Indian Trail, you didn't drop off at the entrance to Old Sluice. You went up to the top of the hill to Chappie Rock and took a left and went down the slab from the top.
exactly.
And I remember that, and obviously you do too. So, I'm working my way around to getting you to talk a little bit about Gene Chappie and the Indian Trail and how that came about.
Well, here we are. My brother and I were trying to help these Jeeps get into camp. We wanted them in before dark if we could. And at least get them to Buck Island. And if they had damage or something. So they were backed up quite a ways up to the Frog Pond and that $1,000 hill or whatever they call it. They were back that far.
That's a ways.
So there was 25 to 35 Jeeps there.
That's pretty much back to Little Sluice.
So my brother, we talk it over to say, okay, Chappie is around the corner. You don't really see him.
Mm-hmm.
But if you saw him, you would find him in a moment. You'd identify him. He always wore a red bandana on his head. And with his green coverall, you could always find Gene Chappie. And all of a sudden, we started taking people on this lower route to the lower slab. And we got those people through there and gone, and they were tickled to death. They were to camp ahead of these other people that were ahead of them. And pretty soon, Chappie comes whistling around the corner there and wanted to know what was going on. How come there was no sheep coming his way? And all of a sudden, he heard some people talking, and the guy had a radio going music, and he looked down over the side and he saw these Jeeps going below him. Well, who authorized that? Who's doing this? Well, my brother and I got the brunt of it, and we named it the Indian Trail because of our Native American heritage, and plus we found that walking back and forth up that hill. We says, wait, people can drive this.
Sure, easily.
A couple of bad spots, but you chunk those up and they're okay. And that's pretty much. He didn't quit harping on us for a day or two. I think even when we got to camp, it was worse.
And Gene could be like that.
Oh yes, he could. Vicious. We apologized, and they kind of use that to this day.
Yeah, he apologized, and the Indian Trail was born. So the only two Indians that were ever on the Indian Trail were named Arnold.
Oh, I'm sure there were people long before us.
That's a great story. So when you two started in Jeepers Jamboree, the Jeeps were different than what they are
Yes.
today. A lot less articulation, all leaf springs, pretty short, pretty narrow, right?
Yeah.
And what else do you remember about those Jeeps?
Oh, they worked good. The people were hardy people. Oh gosh, I think the Jeeps are maybe, I hate to say better built, but stronger built. I think the original Jeeps are made for farm equipment. I think way back with the PTO, you know, the
I remember them having PTOs.
yeah, and I think they did augers on with them, and they had lifts or something for a little blade or something. They would maybe plow snow or something. I'm not sure what they were, but I'm pretty sure they were farm equipment.
So on your first jamboree, I'm going to address this to you, Sheri. On your first jamboree, what did you take with you?
Sleeping bag, change of clothes, and a bathing suit.
That's it.
Pretty much, yeah. I don't even think we brought food. We must have had beer or something, but I don't. You know, we didn't bring any food. They said, "Oh, there's food in camp," so we just took off.
So that explains how you could put 4 people in a flat fender, because it was 4 people, 4 sleeping bags.
That's really about it.
And about it.
Yeah, they kind of set on them, if I remember right.
And I remember we had to take the steps off of the old military at some point on that trip. We had, and he was worried about his Uncle Donald, what he was going to say about removing the steps, you know. But
That's funny.
They were in their 70s getting in and out of that Jeep. You know, they were, to us then, they were old people.
Sure,
You know?
sure.
And everybody was really nice. The trail people were nice. It just seemed like everything was so nice. Food was fabulous. You know, she didn't have to cook. That was one of the first things
That's a big draw.
we realized.
it's a big draw for women. I don't know why more women don't go,
Because they don't have to.
They don't have to cook or, you know, plan all of the meals and everything. It's a great thing for them.
Because every time we went, you were the cook. You know, the guys
Any other
started
place,
coming in later, you know, and helping the cook. But gosh, it's a lot of work for the gals.
So, both you and Kenny went on the Expedition de las Americas. Is that correct?
Yes.
And do you still have that Jeep?
Yes, I do.
You're gonna keep it forever?
Yeah, sure.
I would.
Sure. Well, it's there.
If you're not, you can let me know.
It's our family. No, it's
I
our
know.
family. Gee,
Yeah, no doubt.
Tell them the last year at Jeepers Jamboree, I think all of them were there.
Not all of them, but all of them that were still
running. Yeah,
running. Yeah.
Yeah, there was like 5 or 6.
At 5.
of them. Yeah.
At 5.
that's what there were.
Yeah, and so get into the, like how that all happened.
So there were only 5. Okay, so
5 CJ7.
so it was Al Graham and you and Mark and Ken Collins, and who was the
That's Tim's now.
Tim Stiggins, right?
And the other one was
Bob Torin.
Bob Torn. Well, no, it
He
wasn't
didn't have
Bob
a
Torn.
Jeep.
I'm sorry, it was Bob Rainier.
Oh,
It was Chip, well, him and Chip Gash were in 105, I think it was. He's a Franzia. And that was a nephew to Chip Gash. So he's got one. The Franzia kid has one. And I understand he sold it. Somebody has that.
Well, Al Graham's was sold to Chris Collard. Do you know Chris?
Yes. Okay, so that's Al's. That was the doctor's rig. Al came upon it.
Okay.
And then Ken Collins, that's Tim Stiggin has that Jeep. Mark Smith, I believe, might still be in the museum in Georgetown, or it's at
I think
Jeep headquarters.
I think Omix Ada bought his whole collection, Mark's whole collection,
Okay.
and they're, you know who they are?
No.
They're kind of a original equipment manufacturer. So they make parts for old Jeeps that look and feel and act and look perfect original.
Okay.
So I think they bought Mark's whole collection, and I would guess that that's where it is.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a great place for it, because they'll preserve it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was just sitting there in that museum. The tires were rotten.
Yeah.
And then I have the 5th. And then we had a pickup. We had a 3/4 ton utility pickup. It'd be almost like a telephone PGD truck, had the boxes with the fender wells. And then there was a station wagon, the Cherokee.
So I'm assuming that the tip-to-tip trip was something that Mark dreamed up. Is that right?
That was his His baby, yep.
The 21,000-mile trek begins in the cold and fog of Cape Horn, the tip of South America. But to Mark Smith, lumberjack, contractor, four-wheel drive specialist, and expedition leader, it is the fulfillment of a dream.
Four-wheeling and a challenge, something as a Darien has been a challenge to me for, as I say, a 12-year period. But just something I feel we can do. I feel we have the men, the equipment, the knowledge, and the background to do something like this.
Ken and Mike Arnold are brothers who share a common heritage with the land. Their ancestors were here when Columbus came.
The reason I'm here is the thrill of it, I think. I'm into different things that interest me, and this is one of them, jeeping.
Got my wife's total backing and family's total backing, and it was due to the fact that it was a one-time chance in a guy's life to see some country and maybe do something that not too many other people have done.
And say a few words about what kind of an experience that was. What was the most memorable thing that happened to you on that trip?
Existing. There was a daily, he says, I don't care if you're on the highway or what, there was something happened. And, luckily, no injuries, serious injuries. Luckily, everybody lived through that, and that was quite an experience. It was, you never ever do it today.
And what year was that?
1978, November of 1978.
So November of 78, and how many miles did you drive?
It was 26,000 miles. It was
26,000 miles.
Yeah,
And over 5 months.
yeah.
And you went from the tip of South America to the tip of Alaska. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was, we talked it over for quite a while. And there were some other people who were going to go, kind of talked me into it. And my brother worked for the county at that time, and he asked for permission off and to take 4 or 5 months off, and I said, absolutely not. He says, I'll see you. He just walked off the job.
He quit.
He quit that day.
So
He didn't want his brother to go alone.
of course not.
Probably not, and
Yeah.
I didn't want him to go either.
That's some stuff like that. When you're leading up to it, in my experience, when you're leading up to it, you think, well, I can't leave my county job. It's too good a job. And looking back at it, that's the experience of a lifetime. Of course, you leave any job to do that.
Yeah, and people did.
Yeah.
'Cause, we had several meetings, probably for about 6 months prior to that. We'd meet once a month, or there'd be something else come up, you know, and so there was sometimes at those meetings, there's quite a few people that we thought were gonna go. And at the last minute, they didn't go. And I don't know, Sheri, we spent too much money. It was advertised it was going to cost $3,500. It was going to be subsidized. Well, that's when there was a gas shortage, fuel shortage.
There was.
That time, and Goodyear didn't want to. They gave us all the tires, but it was a new off-road type, and it had thin walls, and they lasted 3 days because the way the cutters were cutting
The angled
the angle
brush.
was just
Yeah.
like punji sticks, and
So you're saying that to get through these spots, you were in these 5 CJ7s, and you had local people cutting brush in front of you with a machete, so
Correct.
you could get through.
that's exactly what it was, machetes.
How often did you hear from Mike?
Never.
So for 5 months you didn't talk to him.
Pretty much. We met at Christmas time in Masawan.
Okay.
They flew up.
And I wrote you
and
a couple letters.
He
that I
wrote
got
letters, and he sent postcards to everybody in the family, and none of them got
To anybody.
You know.
Because I thought from Ushuaia, the further south city in the world,
I know where it is, yeah.
and I said, this would be great. The kids and people will have a postmark.
From Ushuaia,
I
yeah.
went and spent $40 and bought postcards and mailed them and addressed them to everybody. Not one postcard.
The only mail I got actually is when they were in the jungle, because the missionaries would fly in, and then they would take the mail out to Panama, I guess.
Yeah.
And I would get a couple of letters in, but
And Ken Collins had to fly to Panama to get a rear end part, and we sent mail with him too.
and no
Yeah.
phone calls.
No, I wouldn't
It
think
took
so.
an act of God to get through
A
on
phone
my
call,
phone.
sure.
Yeah, you had to get a hold of a international operator.
And those Jeeps still have racks on the roofs for ladders, right?
Yes.
And what were the ladders for?
Well, crossing little creeks, little streams, or a gully, or we were in a river, we laid them on the ground and climbed up out of the river.
Use them for traction.
Traction. They were used as aluminum and channel only. It was a channel iron, I guess, but only aluminum. And they nested inside of each other, so you could put two pair together.
That is a crazy trip. I'm gonna change gears a little bit. Tell us about the prospect around the hood of Jeeps everywhere in Placerville.
And about,
How'd that come about?
well, I bought this business in 1970.
Arnold's for Awards.
Arnold's for Awards. And we sold the dickens out of these gold miners. And gosh, at that time, they didn't cost much at all. And the story I got was that it was a guy in Alaska that designed this guy. And he paid one of our manufacturers at that time X amount of dollars to produce these gold miners. Well, after they did it, and it was like a 3-piece mold, so it was a complex little
Thing.
to put together. And so they told this fella that he had to purchase X amount of these. I think it was like 500 he had to buy to make it worth their while. This is after they'd already paid something up front. Well, he says, I can't afford to buy 500 of those. He says, why can't I buy 50 at a time or 25? And they weren't going to go for it. So as it turned out, he just let it go, the patent, and the manufacturer had the right to sell them. So I bought them from them for 25 years and thereabout. And now they're out of business. And somebody else has that mold again. And boy, you talk about expensive. They're about what that guy was paid for the mold, probably, way back
Sure.
then.
Sure. And how did they end up on Jeeps everywhere?
I think it was the guy, like the salesman we were talking about, Chuck Walker's friend, or Chuck Walker.
So Chuck Walker was the
I
salesman.
believe he was a Jeep salesman for a dealer in Sacramento. And I used to see him everybody saw him on Jeeps. And I had people calling me, can you get those little gold panners? Yeah. So I started getting them. You get them silver or the bronze.
But then Chuck would put them on Jeeps that he sold.
I think he put them on a Jeep that he sold. That's my story that I heard
Okay.
way back when.
And I know Chuck Walker from when he was a rock roller on Walker Hill,
Yes.
which was I think he quit sometime in the 80s. Or maybe
Sounds
about
about right.
1990. He was still going on trips in the 90s, but
Yeah.
I don't think he was rock rolling anymore.
Because people used to get he and Ken Collins mixed up.
Okay.
They were both pretty tall guys and kind of wore a cowboy hat.
And they were both pretty thin, had
Yes,
the same build. Now that
yeah.
I think about it, yeah.
Yeah. And I think Ken Collins had a Jeep dealership to boot
That's right.
in Placerville. And the first time I saw Chuck Walker, the comparison was amazing to me. I'd see it easily. You could mistake him for Ken.
Okay. Interesting. I just remember Chuck. I remember before I started rock rolling, I remember Chuck being at Walker Hill
Yeah.
and Always had a smile for everybody. Stayed always in the same spot, always pointing, and always had a smile for everybody.
He did.
Real
He
pleasant
really
fellow.
did. Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Him and Noby was always at the little sluice. And Chuck was always there. They were always two happy faces whenever you saw them. And Mark wanted people to be nice to people. These are customers.
And that philosophy still stands at Jamboree.
I think so.
I mean, I'm now in my 30. This will be my 33rd year of rock rolling. Yeah, and when I started rock rolling, I remember my trail boss, who was Kevin at the time.
Was he? Okay.
Yeah. He was young. Dan DeWolf was his boss, and Kevin wasn't on the committee, but Dan conscripted him to be the rock roller boss. And I remember 30 some years ago, Kevin at the meeting in the morning saying, "Remember, be nice to everybody." That's part of the gig, to be nice, and that's still mantra.
Good.
Be nice to everybody.
Yeah.
Sheri, I wanted to ask you about your grandfather.
Okay.
Tell me who he was and what you remember of him.
Okay, well, he was the forest ranger for El Dorado National Forest, and I think it was from like 1918 to 1955, somewhere around there. But he used to do a lot of walking, and he would go out with his horse, and he'd take me with him and put me on the horse, and then he walked. He was a real tall guy with a long stride. And so, I had been in those mountains a lot. And then I went on a trail ride, or several trail rides with him, and he was the boss, the trail boss. And so we one year went to Rubicon Springs, and we went from Tahoe on horseback. We went from Tahoe to China Flat and Desolation Valley, then to Rubicon Springs, and then out to Loon Lake, and then Pearl Lake, and then I can't even remember where the next night was, and then we met the wagon train for the parade.
From Pearl, I bet you went to Wright's.
That's not very far. I mean, usually we
Go further.
That's why I'm not sure, but
Maybe Fred's or something. Who
yeah,
knows?
could be. Yeah. And so the first time we were going in, and Mike was driving our first time going in the front way, where he's drinking beer and everything, and we're getting to the point of going down the sluice. And I remember saying to him, you need to kind of cool it. He says, "What do you mean?" And I said, "I rode horseback up the sluice, and it's a pretty scary place. I think you need to pay attention."
Yeah, sure.
So, but yeah, I spent a lot of time with him in the mountains. I was glad that he got into jeeping, because it got me back in the mountains.
So for reference, from my point of view, if he was the district ranger or forest supervisor or whatever he was in 1918, that's 10 years after the Forest Service started and 8 years after the El Dorado National Forest was established. So that goes back a bit.
It goes back.
That's remarkable.
There's Jack Sweeney and other people that I know that were surveyors and or friends of your grandpa. I knew that Larry Hyder admired your grandpa. I used to find his blazes on trees. There was one actually near Buck. We found his blaze still on that tree. He did the property line, the National Forest property line, from Placerville to Lake Tahoe.
This is your grandfather?
Yeah, and they said that he said himself, he says, "I don't know how many acres I lost down that American River Canyon." He said there was some of that was impassable.
But Jack Sweeney said I could always find your grandpa's mark, or they did a post or something. And he said, with all of the equipment I have now, I can't believe how close he was to being right on. I don't know what he used, but...
So I'm sitting here with a list of questions, and when we do these interviews, we have stuff in mind we want to talk about ahead of time. But I'm gonna go off script right now. I helped Jack do the survey of the Rubicon Trail Foundation property, which is the about 300 acres between Rubicon Trail Partnerships Spider Lake property and Rubicon Soda Springs property. And you know the lay of that land, you know what I'm talking about. On the north corner of that, there's a quarter corner with a jog. And at that corner, you know what a story tree is?
Yeah.
So back in the day, they would put, at corners, they would place a marker where the actual corner was, but they go 30 or 40 or 50 feet away to a tree, shave the front of it off, and they had a handheld tool that they would mark into the face of the tree what the longitude and latitude and which direction, what bearing, and how far away the actual corner was. And they'd use the story trees to locate the.
Right.
And I know you know this. I'm going through for the
Yeah.
for the purpose of the interview. All those story trees are gone because they're firs,
Yeah.
and they've rotted and fallen over, and they don't use them anymore. They use K tags, the yellow square tags, right?
Right.
One of the unique things about Rubicon is we have lots of cypress or juniper, right? And we know those trees are hundreds of years old, right? Or thousands in some cases. I don't know whether it's one of your dad's story trees, but I'm suspecting now that it is. At the bottom of the canyon, where the property line takes a jog, where the Little Rubicon River, about where it runs into the main Rubicon, there's a story tree there that's 100% preserved because it's juniper. And I have a picture of it. I'm going to get it to you.
Yeah.
I bet it's his.
It could be, yeah.
I'm
I think Jack would know.
Jack didn't know.
He didn't
He was
know?
there with me.
Okay.
And but he was also, I mean, when we hired him in mid-July of 2016 to survey that for us. So he was well into his 70s, 77, 78, and I had a GPS with me that tracked, and we walked 14 miles one day, 16 the next, and 8 the day after that.
Wow.
And he was in his mid to late 70s. I was shocked.
Yeah.
I was shocked. I was in my 50s and was like, I don't know if I can keep up with this guy. But he didn't. I don't think he remembered at that point that
He might not, yeah.
that your dad, your grandfather did that. But I've got a picture of it, and I'll get it
I'd like
to
see
you.
it.
Yeah.
Down by the swimming holes at the bottom of where the Rubicon River runs into down by the Dirty Dozen.
Okay.
Anyway,
I'd like to see it.
and you'll probably cut out about 2/3 of that, but it was a moment for me.
Yeah.
So I'm having a moment here.
Well, that's good. You know that you've been able to see this too is pretty cool. But you know, his lifetime, we've often talked about the stuff he saw in the modern marvels. You know, people walked on the moon in his lifetime, and he was born right before there was automobiles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We saw the automobile invented. Oh gosh, I mean.
And what year did you say he started at the El Dorado?
I think it was 18. I think it was 1918.
So for context, the Forest Service was invented in 1908, Gifford Pinchot, and the El Dorado was established in 1910. So
they're kind of at the beginning. That's
yeah,
for
that's
sure. Yeah.
that's remarkable.
And I know that that's how El Dorado was misspelled. Because it's one word.
Sure.
El Dorado, or some new person sent that in, and
It was the El Dorado forever.
Yeah.
And if you, I've been known to go to a meeting or two where there's both El Dorado National Forest and El Dorado County folks there, and they still poke at each other about it. The El Dorado County guys will say, well, you spelled it wrong. The El Dorado Forest are like, you spelled it
You
wrong.
spelled it
yeah,
wrong.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
It's funny.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good story.
that's good stuff. So is there anything else you guys want to talk about?
Well, I think you should give us credit for doing the food for 11 years for the Jamboree.
I think we should.
I came home one night and I volunteered
Yeah.
because Mike McNabb didn't want to do it anymore, and I volunteered. She says, "You what? you did what?" And I mean, not knowing anything, and we went to the second year. Jim McNabb, bless his heart, would travel everywhere to pick up deals.
Get good food at a low price.
Yeah.
Yes. And we did that. Mike still continued doing it. Well, we went to a food show or a food fair at whatever that county fair was down by Stanford. And all the food service people were there. And oh my goodness, that opened all kinds of avenues. And, you know, U.S. Foods, I think we dealt with U.S. Foods the first couple 3 years or so, and then Cisco really wanted our business. Started bringing the trailer up.
I don't think people really think, even Doc McDavid, you know, he was on the board.
For years.
For years, and he came in one time when we were bringing food in. And he says, "I never thought about this." I said, "What, you think it just appears or what?" He says, "Oh my God, look at all those trailers and look at all that food."
It's a lot of food.
It's a lot of food, you know. You're feeding 1,000 people 4 days, and it takes a lot.
And I'll say this, I back in my younger days when I was a young buck and I would get assigned to the latest rock rolling shift, and you know the older guys would go in because they had already worked 12 hours and they were beat, and we'd roll in at 2 in the morning with the last of the Jeeps, and there was always food for us.
Yeah,
Yep.
we never went to bed until the.
Yep, you were still awake.
Tell you what is Boom Springer. He did that for me and my brother, and I'll never forget him for that. So we decided we're going to do that.
I think the biggest challenge that we had, two big ones, but the biggest challenge was when they had the fire on the hill, and everybody had to stay in another day. So,
That was a challenge for me as well.
yes, and we had to feed everybody for 3 more meals actually, you know, with what we had in camp.
Dandy will come over,
Sheri?
talk to Sheri. Yeah.
Because he was
He
the
was the president.
boss.
He was the
Yeah.
president at the time. What can we
What do you
do?
think we can do?
I said, we'll figure it out. And the other one was we decided to do Eggs Benedict. So when we were loading the trailers at the Strausses, they brought out the muffins, the English muffins, and they'd been in the freezer, and they were going to put it in a cold trailer. Well, we didn't have very many cold trailers, and I said, no, you don't have to put those in the cold one. You can put it in a regular trailer. It'll be fine. We're going to eat them in a day or 2. So he said okay, and he took them back, and we loaded everything and got into camp. And I always had a guy that was in charge of the cage, what was in there and where the food was.
The
and
bear
everything.
cage, right?
Yeah, and he came to me and he said, "Sure, I can't find the English muffins." I said, no, they must be here. I mean, I saw them. They were out to be loaded. We checked every Jeep trailer in that camp, and there were no English muffins. So anyway, we didn't have any muffins, and we got a satellite phone, and we called the company at Strausses, and they answered, and I said, "I don't have any muffins." And he said, "Oh my God!" And he went. They had put them back in the freezer instead of leaving them out to load. So he actually drove them to Loon Lake, and they were helicoptered in, so we had English muffins. Or
Helicopter muffins.
Yeah, helicopter.
Yeah.
You started to talk a little earlier about Mark Smith and how he chose his directors. Talk about that a little bit.
You know, Mark Smith was, I liked him, and there's a lot of people who didn't care for Mark.
He could be a little rough around the edges.
Yes, he could. But Mark Smith got stuff done. He's a very smart man, I thought. Sheri, we both sat and talked about it one day. The first committee that he had was, actually my father-in-law didn't want to do the cooking. So he appointed
Who was your
McNabb,
father-in-law?
Stan Morris. And
He was a commander.
He was the commander of Legion the first year they used him.
Okay.
So Stan picked Jim McNabb. Says, "You do that." They were good friends, and Jim says, "I'll do that." So anyway, Jim was in charge of the food. Then he had Charlie Fogley. He had an attorney. He had Dr. Bliss, was a MD.
Physician, yeah.
Jim Collins, a Jeep dealer. Ted Malone was a heck of a mechanic.
I didn't know him.
He's a nice, real nice person. I knew him since I was a little kid. In fact, that's whose membership I got. And from him, his family. His son didn't want anything to do with it. He was becoming big in the highway in Nevada. He ended up being the overall boss, I think, like Caltrans or whatever it's called. In Nevada.
NDOT, yeah.
And Gene Chappie, senator, supervisor, and there was another guy, Sid Manwaring, Forest Service person, and we were bypassing Forest Service property.
So you're saying that that it seemed like a haphazard group of people, but Mark chose them very carefully for their diversity and their contacts and their jobs.
Exactly.
It's very interesting.
Every one of them had a Krabinoff was a court reporter.
I didn't know that.
He was a court reporter, so all the minutes and everything, legalese between him and Fogarty. And who was Drysdale was big in the Georgetown community.
Newspaper
editor and so on. So,
Yeah, he started the Rotary over there.
yes.
Yeah. So thank you for coming. Really appreciate your time, and it's great to get a Rubicon Pioneer on video and get these stories, where everyone can access them. Usually we end this with "Let's go wheeling," but today I think we're going to say like, subscribe, and comment, and let's go get another glass of wine.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, John.